Thank you to the Patreon sponsor for this video, Bob White. Super cool dude, knows a ton about farming. Thanks again for the support. Hello everyone, my name is AndrewAJT and we are back with a new video. Top 10 ranged weapons in old school RuneScape, or actually ranged if you want to be specific. This was a very difficult list to make because on first thought it doesn't really seem like there's 10 weapons to really talk about, but there's actually way more than 10, maybe around 20 ranged weapons that are kind of worthy of being on this list, so I had to leave a lot out. And these are going to be the best ranged weapons of the game, and also ranged weapons that are very useful at different times in the game, like for lower levels or for Slayer or something like that, PKing. You might disagree with some of it, let me know your thoughts in the comments, but without further ado, let's jump right in, the top 10 ranged weapons in OSRS. Before we get started though, make sure you guys hit the like button if you want me to give my Bloodhound pet more bones. It's one of the easiest and best ways to support the channel. So number 10 is a surprise choice. This is the DORGESHUUN crossbow. Now this isn't a very powerful ranged weapon in and of itself, so this might surprise some people, but I did mention on this list I'm going to be considering how powerful is it for different times in the game, and this is extremely powerful for when you're just starting out. And especially in these Deadman seasons, this was one that barely anyone played other than me. It's a very good crossbow because it has a very fast attack speed, which is kind of unusually fast. It's like a tick faster than most crossbows. It's very cheap. You can buy it under Lumbridge after you complete the Lost Tribe, or you can just buy it from the GE. And it even has a special attack, which many low-level weapons don't have. I mean, how many level 28 weapons have a special attack, which you can use if you complete the Death to the DORGESHUUN quest? The special attack snipe isn't that good. It can hit a little bit more accurate depending on the situation, and it has a chance to lower defense, but it's still unusually good for something this low level. And the bolts are also really cheap, so at this time in the game when you probably don't have Ava's accumulator, you hardly even need to pick up the bolts, so there's really a lot of uses for this. It's a one-handed weapon. You can use a shield. It's really good for safe spotting. It's pretty good for training defense at the same time because the speed reduction for long range is not as punishing as most crossbows would be, and it really outclasses most ranged weapons early on in the game as far as affordability and durability. Obviously it's useless for someone like my range level, but all of these attributes for low levels, Deadman, Iron Man, allows it to just sneak into the first spot on this list. Number 9 is the only ranged weapon that you cannot actually equip. This is the Dwarf Cannon, which you can get after the Dwarf Cannon quest. So this is an item you can put on the floor, and it acts as more of a turret than a cannon. It's basically going to constantly shoot all of these monsters for you. It doesn't work against other players, unfortunately. That would be pretty fun. But it actually does work as a little turret for you for monsters and bosses, which is pretty unbelievable that it works on some bosses. And even though it is very expensive to use, unlike the DORGESHUUN crossbow, it can actually make you a lot of GP. I mean, you're just seeing in here, we almost have a cannon factory going on at Venenatis, and we just make absolute bank. Not only can it make you GP, it also gives you range XP, which is an interesting design choice because you're not doing the work. The cannon is doing the work. You just have to reload it. I know it is halved, but that's still free range XP on top of the XP you're getting from whatever weapon you're using at the time. It's also amazing for Slayer. I mean, it just completely changes the complexion of that skill, and it makes things AFK, which I'm always a fan of. You can just stand near the cannon and occasionally reload it and sit there with auto-retaliate and relax, which is nice. Maybe binge watch some of my videos. You can also upgrade the cannonballs a little bit, which makes this really a game changer. Number 8 is the Heavy Ballista, which is a very powerful weapon. Honestly, not too much to say about this one other than it's kind of the BFG of RuneScape. This hits extremely high. It's very slow, but it has a lot of range bonus. It's extremely accurate, and it really packs a punch. Let's just show you a little bit of a demonstration here. So this is a normal hit. Let's see how high we can do. 63. Let's try a special attack, which is very powerful as well. 78. That's so unbelievable. It's a very, very powerful weapon. It's very slow, so it's situational. You're not going to go out and train range with this, but PKing and maybe a few bosses, this can be a very worthwhile weapon to use, especially with dragon javelins. Number 7 is an extremely unique ranged weapon. This is the Black Chinchompa, which is a very expensive ranged weapon to use, but this basically is a throwing weapon where it explodes when you hit something with it. So that actually can hit multiple opponents, and there's actually a lot of uses to this. It's very good for training, although I wouldn't recommend it for that because most people use range a lot past 99, so all that XP that you spent on training is going to go to waste, but it is very good at bosses because there's actually a little trick with it. The damage that you deal with Black Chinchompas is based on the monster you're hitting, so in this example, I can use it on the minion at ARMADYL, and it actually will have the same defense for both monsters, so the Criera boss will have the same defense as the minion, which is extremely overpowered. I think they actually fixed it at one point and reverted it because it was so overpowered, but people really liked doing it, so this is a very useful weapon. It's good in many situations. It's even good in PvP in some clan wars, so you can really get creative and find some great uses for Black Chinchompas if it's worth the cost. Be careful though, because if you die, then all of the Chinchompas will run away and you cannot pick them up off the ground, so you can actually lose a lot of money from a disconnect or something, or a careless death if you have a lot of Black Chinchompas on you. Believe me, I know from experience. Number 6 is a weapon that has really stood the test of time and is still very useful as a mid-level bow. This is the Crystal Bow, which is the only ranged weapon in the game that doesn't really require ammunition. You literally don't need anything in your ammo slot to use it. Now, I might be a little biased because this is a very nostalgic weapon for me. When I first became a member, like a dozen years ago, I remember seeing people using this in Castle Wars and seeing those glowing green arrows and being amazed by how cool they look. But even today, this is a pretty useful weapon. You can wear a blessing in the ammo slot because it doesn't require arrows, so that gives you some prayer bonus. It has a very long range. Even on rapid, it still shoots 10 squares, which is extremely far. It's a very accurate bow. It's been buffed multiple times. It no longer requires recharging. It always keeps its full stats, which is really awesome. And with the Land of the Elves quest, you can actually get crystal armor, which gives it a accuracy and damage bonus, which is really cool. And it's also pretty cheap to use overall. This is an older video of doing jab, but even today it makes jab pretty easy to deal with the healers just because it shoots from so far away. It's also pretty fast. It has a whip speed with rapid, which is kind of unexpected for a bow. The only real issue with it is there's nothing really special about it that makes it really pop. There's no special attack or effect or anything that hits a 50 or lowers defense or something like that. It could really use a special attack to make it good for high levels, but in the meantime, it's still a pretty relevant weapon all these years later. Number 5 on the list is the CROSSBOW, which is dropped by Revenants in the Wilderness. The great thing about this bow is that if you charge it with Revenant Ether, you get a 50% accuracy and damage bonus versus any monster in the Wilderness, making this one of the best weapons to use overall in all of the Wilderness, at least in PvM situations. And this is really a big deal. It's good at Revenants, which are one of the best moneymakers in the game for many players. It's good for Wilderness Slayer, which is a very good way to get points. It's even decent in PvP. Like, you wouldn't go out and use this weapon to PK with, but if you need to defend yourself in PvP, you can actually do it with this weapon. There are some downsides to it though. You need to charge it with at least 1000 Revenant Ether, which can be kind of expensive because if you die, that is always lost on death. And it's also not great because you can't use a shield with it, so that's kind of an issue at places like Venonanus. But overall, this thing hits really high, really accurate. It's super fast as well, so overall the best weapon by far in this whole area of the game. Number 4 is the Dragon Hunter Crossbow, which is a rare reward from the Chambers of Xeric. This is the first crossbow on our list, and it's really a beast. It's really good versus any dragons or even dragon-like creatures like Ulm. It gives a 30% accuracy and damage bonus versus any of these creatures, which is pretty insane. I mean, you can just see some of the hits here on Vorkath. It's absolutely nuts. And it's also not really a bad crossbow versus normal monsters. In fact, it gives a 95 range bonus, which is very high, especially for a relatively fast one-handed range weapon. Now, this bow actually used to be pretty mediocre, When it came out and for a long time afterwards, it only gave a 10% accuracy and damage bonus versus dragons, which was okay. It was still the best bow versus many dragons, even despite that low amount, but it wasn't really that great. You could use other bows and not really lose much. Then eventually in 2018, they buffed it to 30%, which is what it's at today, and the price really shot up, making it so good. It also can use some of the newer bolts like the Diamond Dragon bolts, which other bows like the Rune Crossbow cannot use. I have a funny relationship with the crossbow because I used it for several thousand KBD kills back when it was red, and it only did 10%, and eventually I sold it for 23 mil. Today it's worth 111 mil, so rip me. The third best range weapon in the game is also a crossbow. This is the ARMADYL crossbow, which is one of the best weapons in the game, period. It's super accurate. It has a 100 range bonus, which makes it pretty effective anywhere. It also uses the newer bolts, and it hits very high consistently. It has a prayer bonus. It's one-handed, which means you can combine it with so many good shields like the Elysian. I mean, the ARMADYL crossbow and Elysian combo is one of the best in the game, in my opinion. It has some prayer bonus, and most importantly, it actually has a little bit more range than most crossbows, so it can actually shoot a little bit farther away, which is kind of useful if you think about it, because the biggest flaw with a lot of crossbows is the range is just really low. It even has an okay special attack, which I've talked about. Many of the weapons on this list do not have a special. It hits a little bit more accurate, even though it makes a really annoying sound, and you can use it multiple times. It's not really a special attack where you'd say, okay, I'm going to a boss and this is going to be my main special, other than maybe Venenatus. But it's good in those clutch situations where you just need a hit to finish off a monster or a boss. It does suffer from a little bit of the crystal bow effect, where it's not really amazing in any way. It's just kind of very good in many departments, which really does mean a lot because it's one of the most versatile weapons in the game, and it doesn't degrade either, so that really can save you a lot of GP compared to some of the other weapons on this list. The runner-up spot on our list is one of the most powerful weapons in the game, period. That is the Twisted Bow. Now listen closely, do you hear that? That is all the people in the comments saying, oh my god, how is the Twisted Bow not the best one in the game? But trust me, I'll explain. The great thing about it is that versus monsters with a high magic level, the accuracy and damage actually scale up, and many of the most powerful bosses in the game have a very good magic level, and even some lower level bosses like the Giant Mole have a decent magic level, making the Twisted Bow the best option. It is by far the most fun weapon in the game to use. It hits insanely high, and it makes some of the bosses in the game look pretty easy overall. It's really good in raids, it's really good in the Chambers of Xeric, meaning it's one of the most important high-level weapons you can get if you're a PvMer. It is just so amazing in many places. Now, there are some flaws with it. So for one thing, the boost to its damage and accuracy is a little bit unbalanced. It actually gives a lot more damage bonus than it does accuracy, and this is pretty noticeable. It can be a pretty inaccurate weapon actually versus some bosses like Criera, where it just can hit a ton of zeros, and even on the Giant Mole, a pretty weak boss, it can still hit a decent amount of zeros. So it's very important to have a high accuracy bonus when you use the Twisted Bow, especially because its base range attack bonus is only 70, which is pretty mediocre if not bad. It does give a +4 prayer bonus though, which is very nice, but the accuracy issue means that you're going to have to sacrifice some defense for your gear, and that's a problem especially when you can't use a shield. It's also not very versatile. It does shoot very far, but it's really bad versus anything with a low magic level or even just not a very high magic level. It hardly hits anything on other players, even if they have 99 magic, so it's not an option for PvP. It's not really good for Slayer monsters unless they are a boss, so the list of monsters it's good against is actually not that expansive. It was also nerfed a couple years ago outside of the Chambers of Xeric. The damage cap was lowered a little bit, and they also lowered the magic level of General Grardus specifically so it wouldn't be good against him anymore. Don't get me wrong, the Twisted Bow is so amazing, it's bonkers how good it is, but I feel like a lot of people who might not have one because it's so expensive just think it's absolutely amazing and it doesn't have any flaws, so that's why I wanted to go over a few of them. Even though it's so good for money making and pet hunting, it is by definition kind of a situational weapon. Before we talk about number one, I do want to give a few honorable mentions. The Hunter Crossbow, Black Salamander, Magic Shortbow, Third Age Bow, Dragon Throne Axe, the Dark Bow, the Rune Crossbow. All could arguably be on this list. Let me know if you think they would be on your list, and the Sear Coal sucks, but it is cool, and I wish they would buff it. The best range weapon in OSRS, without a doubt, is the Toxic Blowpipe, which you can get from Zulrah. This weapon is just ridiculous. It fires darts at the normal speed, but it also adds 60 range bonus, making them way more accurate than normal, and it's by far the best DPS against most monsters in the game, mainly due to that ridiculous attack speed. It's good versus almost everything. As far as versatility, this is by far one of the best in the game. It's really good versus low-level monsters. It really tears them apart. It's pretty good versus medium-level monsters like for Slayer, and it's really good versus a lot of bosses as well. Even though it can be inaccurate on bosses, because it hits so fast, it really makes up for it, because even if you hit a 0 or 2, the next couple hits might be 220, so it really adds up the damage so fast. The special attack is decent. It hits 50% higher, and it heals you about half of what you hit, so that's not great, but it is fairly good. You can't use a shield with it, which leaves you a little bit exposed, but because you take things down so quickly, you're going to save yourself from taking a lot of damage anyway. It is expensive to use, but you can make a lot of that GP back by earning money with the blowpipe. It's really good for things like Slayer that do make you a lot of profit. Most things that the Twisted Bow is really good at, the blowpipe is still fairly useful at, and the same can't really be said about the reverse, like you wouldn't go use the Twisted Bow at gargoyles or something. The biggest flaw is the very short range of the blowpipe, but it does gain 2 squares of distance on long range. It does lose a little bit of speed in PvP, but you can at least defend yourself with it. All of these factors and just how good the blowpipe is in almost any situation means that to me it is the best range weapon in the game, and I think it's honestly a little bit overpowered. People have been tossing the idea around of nerfing the blowpipe for a long time, and I do think it's worth a little bit of discussion because this thing is so good, and unfortunately it makes some other ranged weapons not as relevant because the blowpipe is just the best weapon almost everywhere. I do read all my comments, so let me know what you think of this list. Where did I get it wrong? Should the Twisted Bow really be the second best? And does the blowpipe deserve a bit of a nerf, or is it okay how it is? Let me know if you have suggestions for more top 10s because these are really fun to make, and also please like the video if you enjoyed. That really helps me out if you haven't already. You can also subscribe if you haven't already and hit the bell to get notifications whenever I upload, which is typically every Tuesday. You can join my clan chat in game, AndrewAJT62, that'll be up on screen. Just my general discussion, PvP, PVM, anything goes type of clan. You can also join our Discord down below. You can follow me on Twitter down below at AndrewAJT, and I'll follow you back if you play RS. And you can also support me on Patreon with the link in the end screen if you're feeling generous. Thank you all for sticking to the end. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week.